Hello, everybody. So, for the last couple of weeks, Andy has been with us and taken us through our first two in the series of There Is Enough, where we are trying to explore issues of earthly treasures and money and finances through the lens of God's kingdom. So, today we're going to continue this There Is Enough conversation in Mark chapter 12, verses 38 to 44. So, I'm going to read to you from this passage during my message, but if you'd like to pause here and read through it yourself, feel free. So I've lived cross-culturally for nearly 13 years. With the exception of several trips back to America, I've lived, worked, married, parented in a culture different to the one I was born in and grew up in. I think I often underestimate the amount of brain space that's taken up in my head navigating cultural differences. We've been in New Zealand for 4.5 years now, and when we first got here, there's a lot of things that I didn't know. Like, how do you do birthday parties? I'd never heard of pass the parcel or fairy bread. Also didn't know etiquette when you greet one another. Some people kiss cheeks here, or at least we did before COVID, and I actually found that quite awkward. Also awkward was knowing when somebody was going to do that and when not. Also, sometimes I'd sit in conversation in social settings and people would just start laughing and I couldn't work out why. I wasn't sure if I missed something or if I misunderstood something or if I just didn't find it funny. And honestly, there's still some times that I don't quite understand humor here. Living in a different culture as I do is hard sometimes. And I do love it here, but I know that I have to spend quite a lot of time thinking about things that those around me don't have to think about. And I know that sometimes I miss the mark, and sometimes I don't understand. So last year we did a sermon series on Mark, and for those of you who journeyed with us in that time, you'll perhaps remember this question that Mark asks indirectly throughout his gospel: will you run away or will you recognize? Mark takes us on a journey throughout his gospel of listening and watching as Jesus reveals himself to his followers, and they begin to recognize him as the Messiah. But it's hard for them, and poor things are so often confused because Jesus is presenting to them a culture that is entirely different than their own. He's suggesting that they live by the rules of that culture as well. He's challenging everything that they knew or thought they knew to be true. So a few chapters before the reading that we had today, in Mark chapter 10, James and John, probably thinking that they knew quite well who Jesus was by now and what he was teaching, they came to him and said, "Please, can we sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in glory?" And Jesus basically replies, "First of all, that's not for me to decide. But also, you two don't have any idea what you're asking. Are you able to drink from the cup that I drink? Be baptized by the water with which I'm baptized? Meaning, are you able to walk the path that I'm walking? And if so, then it's actually not at all about sitting in a place of power in God's kingdom. In fact, this path that I'm walking is quite the opposite." And then in chapter 12, where we are today, Jesus warns us again about power and people in positions of power. So starting at verse 38, it says, "As he taught, Jesus said, 'Watch out for the teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and be greeted with respect in marketplaces, and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for show make lengthy prayers.' Then Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched people putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents." So now the fact that Jesus is pointing out the offering of a poor widow, not just a poor person, but a widow, here is a detail that it's important not to overlook. Because just before, in verse 40, Jesus talks about the scribes, the teachers of the law, walking around in their places of power, devouring widows' houses. So there's a contrast here, again, of those in power and those who are not. Then Jesus, calling to his disciples, says, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more to the treasury than all the others." So in the church, we usually take this story and use it as a message in giving. That's how I've heard it anyway. Give everything that we have to God, and in doing so, in giving this message in that light, we're actually lifting up the widow as an ideal that we're all supposed to strive for. So this portrait's painted of her as somebody that we should all seek to embody. Look at her. Look how good she is. We should honor the sacrifice of this woman and try to be just like her. And if you give like she did, maybe you will be respected in the same way as she is. But just like James and John were missing the point, I think we're missing it again. In the middle of a lesson cautioning his disciples about the dangers of power, it seems quite strange that Jesus would suddenly jump into a lesson about giving, unless it was somehow related. And I think that it is. Verses 41 to 44 are not about lifting up the widow to a place of honor and power so that we as a church thousands of years later can give all that we have to give in order to be given as much honor and power as she has. These verses are about honoring the widow's weakness and her humility. They're about continuing to turn the power structures of the world on their heads and help people to see and understand God's kingdom. The widow's true plight was not to be made more powerful and honorable through her giving, but to honor God out of her position of weakness. So we are in a month here at All Saints of talking about money and resources. We're attempting to have the very difficult conversation of how to live in the world but be a citizen of God's kingdom. I think it's a bit like my experience of living my life in a different culture. Trying to figure out how to respond to things like money in a world where it's everything, while trying so hard to live like it's nothing, is not an easy task. It's a complete values clash, and it's hard for our brains to reconcile. I don't know the answers, and I don't think any of us really do, but that doesn't mean that we should stop trying to figure it out. And in doing so, and trying to figure it out, there's an opportunity for us to draw near to God and to draw near to one another. Because one of the most important gifts that we have as disciples of Jesus on this earth is the community of believers around us. Because it's only through the power of an entire community trying to figure this out together, trying to live differently, make different choices for our earthly treasures, that we might be able to show the world God's kingdom. So I'm going to give you all a potentially scandalous and very countercultural challenge in response to our There Is Enough series. Talk about money with those around you. Pause the video now or end the video today and discuss it. Share with one another vulnerably. Talk about how you do it, how you live in God's kingdom with the rules of the world constantly in your face. How do you ensure that you're striving for humility and not power? Learn from one another. Grow together so that we may all be a light in this place.